The quarterback room just exploded. The Minnesota Vikings may call this a quarterback competition, but behind the cameras, it feels far more dangerous. Kyler Murray and J. McCarthy are fighting for the same job, sharing the same field, and answering the same questions, but their words have turned training camp into one of the NFL's most uncomfortable stories. It began with one question: what is your relationship like with the man trying to take your job? Murray answered like a veteran. He spoke about helping the younger quarterback and doing what was best for the team. Then McCarthy changed the tone. He compared their relationship to two students sitting on opposite sides of a classroom, not close teammates, not brothers pushing each other, just two people in the same room, waiting for the coach to teach them. That comparison spread across social media like gasoline near an open flame. Fans questioned whether the tension was real. Analysts criticized McCarthy's maturity. Former players warned that a quarterback under pressure cannot afford to look disconnected. Then Murray revealed his own frustration, admitting that splitting first-team reps was making it harder to learn the offense. Suddenly, both men had exposed something. McCarthy sounded frustrated. Murray sounded impatient. Minnesota now had two quarterbacks fighting for one position, with both careers hanging in the balance. For Murray, this could be his last real chance to prove he is still an NFL starter. For McCarthy, losing could destroy the future. Minnesota imagined when it drafted him in the first round, every throw, mistake, and interview is now evidence. So is this healthy competition or the beginning of a fracture inside the Vikings quarterback room? Tell us where you are watching from. Press 1 if you believe McCarthy will fight back and win the job. Or press 2 if you think Murray will take control. Subscribe to the channel, because this battle is only getting started. The answer that changed everything. The tension did not begin with a bad throw, a sideline argument, or a confrontation in the locker room. It began with a microphone. During OTAs, reporters asked Kyler Murray and J. McCarthy the same question on the same day. What is your relationship like with the quarterback competing against you? Murray answered first, and he sounded exactly like a veteran who understood the cameras were rolling. He acknowledged that McCarthy was younger, said he was willing to share whatever knowledge might help, and emphasized that both quarterbacks wanted what was best for Minnesota. It was calm, professional, safe. Then McCarthy stepped in front of the media and gave an answer that immediately changed the atmosphere. He said the relationship felt like two students sitting on opposite sides of a classroom. One player sat on one side, the other sat across the room. The coaches were responsible for teaching both of them. The words were not openly hostile, but they were cold enough to make people stop and listen again. McCarthy did not describe Murray as a mentor. He did not call him a close teammate. He did not talk about building chemistry or helping each other improve. Instead, he described distance. That is why the comment exploded. In the NFL, quarterbacks are expected to lead the room even when they are fighting for the same job. They are expected to smile, praise the competition, and protect the organization from unnecessary drama. McCarthy chose honesty over diplomacy, and the honesty sounded uncomfortable. To some fans, it was proof that the relationship was already broken. To others, it was simply a young quarterback refusing to pretend. But one thing was undeniable: Murray and McCarthy were not telling the same story. One quarterback presented the competition as cooperation, the other presented it as two separate careers sharing the same space. And once those answers were placed side by side, every future interaction between them carried a different meaning. McCarthy doubles down. McCarthy had an opportunity to soften the message. He did not take it. When reporters later asked whether things felt awkward between him and Murray, McCarthy returned to the same image. He again compared the situation to high school, where another person might sit on the opposite side of the room without creating any real relationship. That second explanation mattered more than the first. A single awkward phrase can be dismissed as poor wording. A repeated comparison becomes something closer to a pattern. McCarthy was telling the public that he and Murray occupied the same quarterback room without necessarily operating as partners. They could listen to the same coaches, study the same playbook, and compete in the same drills without becoming close. To McCarthy's critics, the answer sounded immature. They believed a quarterback fighting to become the face of the franchise should understand that leadership extends beyond throwing the football. Every sentence matters. Every expression is studied. Every public comment sends a message to teammates. But another side of the argument was beginning to form. Why should McCarthy be punished for admitting the truth? Quarterback competitions are rarely comfortable. One player's success can directly reduce the other player's opportunities. Every first-team snap given to Murray is one McCarthy does not receive. Every mistake by McCarthy creates another opening for Murray. They may wear the same uniform, but they are not chasing the same outcome. McCarthy had already lost his rookie season to injury. He had already entered the league carrying enormous expectations. Now, after struggling to establish himself, he was watching Minnesota bring in a veteran with Pro Bowl experience. That would create frustration in almost anyone. The problem was not necessarily what McCarthy felt. The problem was that he allowed the entire league to hear it. In one answer, he exposed the emotional distance inside the competition. In the next, he confirmed that the distance was not accidental. The classroom metaphor was no longer just a strange quote. It had become the defining image of the Vikings quarterback battle. Murray says the quiet part out loud. For a brief moment, Murray appeared to hold the advantage in the public relations battle. He had played the role of the experienced veteran. He had offered help. He had said the right things about competition and teamwork. Then the pressure reached him too. At minicamp, Murray was asked about the most difficult part of learning Minnesota's offense. His answer was direct. Splitting repetitions with McCarthy was making the adjustment harder. That statement changed the balance of the story. Murray was no longer simply the generous veteran helping a younger teammate. He was now publicly acknowledging that McCarthy's presence was limiting the work he believed he needed. The message underneath the answer was difficult to ignore. Murray wanted more snaps. He understood that learning a new system required timing, repetition, and trust with the receivers. Every divided practice period slowed that process. Every rotation forced him to step aside while the quarterback he was trying to beat received the same opportunity. Murray did not attack McCarthy personally. He did not demand the starting job, but his frustration was visible through the language he chose. It sounded like a professional complaint delivered as an explanation. Suddenly, the competition had produced two revealing moments. McCarthy described Murray as a distant classmate. Murray described sharing reps with McCarthy as an obstacle. Neither quarterback had started a fight. Neither had insulted the other directly. Yet both had exposed the same truth from different angles. They did not enjoy sharing the job. Murray's career gave the comment even more weight. He had spent years as the unquestioned starter in Arizona. He had been the centerpiece of an offense and the face of a franchise. Now he was entering practice without control over when he played or how many opportunities he received. For the first time, he had to wait for someone else's number to be called. That discomfort was not weakness. It was evidence of how much the job mattered. The competition was no longer about which quarterback gave the better interview. Both men had now allowed the pressure to reach the microphone. The NFL world picked sides. Once the two clips began circulating together, the debate escaped Minnesota. Fans, analysts, former players, and media personalities all started choosing sides. Some reactions were brutally simple. They watched McCarthy describe Murray like a stranger, then heard Murray complain about divided repetitions, and concluded that the two quarterbacks could not stand each other. Others focused almost entirely on McCarthy. They argued that Murray sounded composed, while McCarthy sounded defensive. They questioned whether a young quarterback could lead an NFL locker room if he struggled to manage a basic media question. The criticism was not limited to football mechanics. It became a judgment of maturity, awareness, and character. Former quarterback Ben DiNucci offered one of the sharpest warnings. His message was clear. Quarterbacks are watched differently from every other position. Their words, posture, and behavior can influence how the entire organization views them. That warning carried weight because backup quarterbacks understand how narrow the margin can be. A player who is not guaranteed, the job cannot afford to become a distraction. But the criticism produced its own backlash. Former Vikings linebacker Ben Leber questioned what people actually wanted from athletes. If McCarthy gave a polished answer, critics might call him fake. When he gave an honest answer, they called him immature. That contradiction became the center of the debate. Was McCarthy being unprofessional? Or was he simply refusing to perform for the cameras? The answer depended on what people already believed about him. Supporters saw a young competitor who was tired of pretending the situation felt comfortable. Critics saw a quarterback handing the media unnecessary ammunition while fighting to save his career. Meanwhile, Murray received more praise for his delivery. But his comments about split reps proved he was not emotionally detached from the battle either. The public had turned the competition into a personality test. Murray was labeled the veteran professional. McCarthy was labeled the frustrated kid. Yet those labels ignored the reality that both men were under enormous pressure and both had revealed it. The NFL world wanted a hero and a villain. The Vikings had two quarterbacks who were simply desperate not to lose. Two careers on the edge, the tension becomes easier to understand when the careers behind it are placed side by side. Kyler Murray arrived in Minnesota carrying a resume that once made competition unnecessary. He had been the first overall pick, the Offensive Rookie of the Year, a Pro Bowl quarterback, and the unquestioned starter in Arizona. For years, the offense belonged to him. Then everything changed. Arizona moved on, and Murray entered a new building without the power he once held. Instead of receiving another franchise commitment, he accepted a short-term opportunity to prove he could still lead an NFL team. That is not a comfortable transition for a former star. Murray was no longer competing against expectations. He was competing against another man for every meaningful snap. McCarthy's pressure was different, but just as severe. Minnesota selected him in the first round, believing he could become the long-term answer. He entered the league after leading Michigan to a national championship, but his rookie season disappeared because of a knee injury. The following season was supposed to be his breakthrough. Instead, injuries and inconsistency created more questions. His completion percentage, passer rating, and turnover numbers gave Minnesota reasons to search for insurance. Murray's arrival became a public signal that the organization was not ready to trust McCarthy without competition. That decision placed both quarterbacks at a crossroads. If Murray wins, he restores his reputation and proves his career as a starter is not over. If McCarthy wins, he protects the future Minnesota once imagined for him, but the loser faces a much darker possibility. For Murray, another failed stop could change how the league views him permanently. For McCarthy, losing the job could convince Minnesota that its first-round investment will never become the answer. That is why every quote sounds sharper than it normally would. These are not two comfortable players competing for preseason attention. They are two careers balancing on the same depth chart. One man is fighting to reclaim what he lost. The other is fighting to keep what he has barely had the chance to own. Only one of them can walk into Week 1 as QB1. The battle moves behind the scenes. While the public focused on interviews, Murray was attacking the competition somewhere far away from the microphones. Before training camp opened, reports indicated that he had spent significant time working with wide receiver Jordan Addison. That detail mattered. McCarthy's biggest advantage was supposed to be familiarity. He already knew Minnesota's coaches, terminology, receivers, and daily routines. Murray was the newcomer who needed time to learn the system and develop chemistry. Instead of waiting for camp, Murray began closing that gap early. Private workouts allowed him to study timing, ball placement, what's, and communication with one of Minnesota's most important offensive weapons. By the time the team gathered, Murray was not starting from zero. He was arriving prepared to challenge McCarthy's strongest argument. That became obvious on the opening day of camp when Murray connected with Addison on a deep throw during his first opportunity with the top offense. One completion did not decide the competition, but the symbolism was impossible to miss. The veteran who had quietly trained with Addison before camp was immediately producing with him in front of coaches and reporters. McCarthy could no longer rely only on familiarity. He had to prove that his experience in the building translated into better command, faster decisions, and stronger execution. He needed to demonstrate that the mistakes of his previous season no longer defined him. The competition was now happening on several levels at once. It was about arm talent, but also preparation. It was about knowledge of the playbook, but also relationships with receiver. It was about physical performance, but also which quarterback could make the offense believe in him. Murray understood that quarterback battles are not won only during official practice periods. They are won through every extra conversation, every private workout, and every moment that builds trust. McCarthy now faced a veteran who was not waiting for the organization to make a decision. Murray was actively forcing one. The classroom may have separated them during meetings, but on the field, both men were reaching for the same receivers, the same huddle, and the same future. Justin Jefferson raises the pressure. Kevin O'Connell tried to control the temperature. The Vikings head coach told reporters that the relationship between Murray and McCarthy remained professional. He emphasized communication, evaluation, and fairness from the organization's perspective. There was no crisis, but professional does not mean comfortable. The most revealing pressure came from Justin Jefferson, as the best player on Minnesota's roster and the receiver every quarterback wants to earn. Jefferson's words carried more influence than a normal training camp comment. When he challenged McCarthy to show more fight and become more aggressive in the competition, the message reached far beyond motivation. Jefferson was telling the young quarterback that talent alone would not be enough. McCarthy needed to command the room. He needed to show teammates that the starting job belonged to him, not because he had been drafted in the first round, but because his presence demanded it. That challenge could be interpreted in two ways. The first was encouraging. Jefferson may have believed McCarthy possessed the ability to win and simply needed to release the confidence and edge hidden underneath the pressure. The second interpretation was far more uncomfortable. Perhaps Jefferson had not yet seen enough. Star receivers do not care about draft status when games begin. They want accuracy, timing, leadership, and consistency. They want the quarterback who gives the offense the best chance to win. Murray knew that. McCarthy knew it too. O'Connell could describe the competition as balanced, but the locker room would eventually make its own judgment. Players notice who controls the huddle. They notice who responds after a mistake. They notice whose passes arrive on time and whose confidence disappears when the defense creates pressure. Jefferson's challenge pushed the competition into an emotional space the coaching staff could not fully manage. McCarthy was no longer just competing against Murray's experience. He was competing for the belief of the players around him. The quarterback who wins the job must do more than survive the evaluation. He must convince the offense to follow him. And when the team's biggest star publicly asks for more fight, the entire room starts watching to see whether that fight appears. Training camp becomes the final trial. Once training camp began, the story moved beyond interviews. Every repetition became evidence. O'Connell insisted the competition would remain fair, but he also made it clear that the distribution of snaps would not always stay perfectly even. Practice periods change. Drives continue or collapse. One quarterback may receive more opportunities simply because he keeps the offense moving. That uncertainty made every possession more important. Murray entered camp needing to prove he could absorb a new system quickly. His experience meant little if he could not process O'Connell's offense, communicate protections, and develop timing with Minnesota's playmakers. McCarthy faced the opposite challenge. He already understood the structure, but he had to prove that understanding could eliminate the errors that had damaged his previous season. The Vikings needed to see better accuracy, better decisions, and more control when the pocket became unstable. A viral practice clip showed McCarthy escaping pressure and throwing a touchdown. Supporters treated it as evidence of progress. Critics argued that in a real game, he might have been hit before releasing the ball. Even his highlights created division. That was the environment surrounding him. Every good play was questioned. Every mistake was amplified. Every expression became a clue about his confidence. Murray faced scrutiny too, but his burden was more immediate. He could not afford to look like a veteran living on past accomplishments. He needed to appear sharper, calmer, and more prepared than the younger quarterback on every meaningful day. The Vikings continued to describe the competition as open. Outside observers were less patient. Some already believed Murray had the advantage. Others insisted Minnesota would give McCarthy every opportunity because of the investment attached to his name. But coaches cannot protect a player forever once the film begins speaking. By the final stages of camp, the decision would come down to trust. Who protects the football? Who moves the offense? Who responds when a practice goes badly? And who looks ready when the pressure stops being theoretical? The public announcement may still have been weeks away, but inside the building, the depth chart was already beginning to take shape. Fuel or fracture, the Vikings now face a decision that reaches far beyond choosing a starting quarterback. Murray offers experience, mobility, haute production, and the urgency of a veteran trying to revive his career. If he learns the offense quickly and earns the trust of the receivers, he may give Minnesota the safer path at the beginning of the season. McCarthy offers youth, long-term potential, familiarity with the organization, and the possibility that his difficult start was only the beginning of his development. If he improves his accuracy and handles pressure with greater maturity, Minnesota may still have the quarterback it believed it drafted. Strategically, the Vikings must avoid allowing the competition to continue without purpose. Competition can sharpen players, but uncertainty can also damage preparation. Receivers need consistent timing. Offensive linemen need confidence in communication. A locker room needs to understand who is leading it. O'Connell must evaluate performance honestly, while making sure neither quarterback turns frustration into division. That is the deeper lesson in this story. Pressure does not create character from nothing. It reveals how people respond when control begins to disappear. McCarthy must learn that honesty is valuable, but leadership also requires awareness. A quarterback's words can affect teammates even when he does not intend to create conflict. Murray must remember that experience does not guarantee opportunity. His willingness to help a younger teammate means more when it remains genuine, even while the job is at stake. Neither player needs to become the enemy. They can compete fiercely without disrespect. They can fight for the same position without allowing resentment to damage the team around them. Football careers are short, but the way athletes handle success, disappointment, and rivalry often lasts far longer than one depth chart decision. The quarterback who wins should lead with humility. The quarterback who loses should respond with professionalism. And the Vikings must choose the player who gives the entire team, not just himself, the best chance to succeed. Now tell us where you are watching from. Press 1 if you believe McCarthy should remain Minnesota's future. Or press 2 if you believe Kyler Murray should take over as the starter. Subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with another NFL fan. Because the next decision in Minnesota could change both careers forever.